They say that to understand a machine is to touch the face of God. Tech priest Varon Cade believed this with every fiber of his being, or at least the few fibers he had left. 93% of his body was now metal, wires, and sacred oils. The flesh that remained existed only because the Omnicia had not yet shown him how to improve upon it. He had spent 217 years in service to the machine god, and in all that time, he had never questioned his faith. Not once. That changed the day he opened the vault on Forge World Metallica and saw what his order had been protecting for 10,000 years. What he saw was not divine. It was not holy, and it made him understand that the Adeptus Mechanicus had been worshipping something far stranger and far more terrifying than anyone dared to admit. My designation is Varon Cade, and before you ask, yes, I still use that name even though names are technically inefficient and emotion is a weakness we are taught to suppress. But I remember being human once, barely, like a dream you cannot quite grasp when you wake. I was born on a hive world where children died in factories before they learned to read, where the only escape was to prove yourself useful to those who controlled the machines. I was 7 years old when I first disassembled a plasma coil without instructions, and by 8, I had been claimed by the Mechanicus. They took me to Mars, to the red planet where the air tastes like iron and every breath reminds you that flesh is weak. They began the modifications immediately. Small at first, neural implants to accelerate my learning, ocular enhancements to see spectrums invisible to normal eyes, respiratory filters because the forges burn with toxins that would kill an unaugmented human in minutes. I did not resist. I wanted this. I wanted to transcend the weakness I had been born with, to become something greater, something that would never break or fail or die like the workers in those hive factories. The Mechanicus promised me immortality through steel, and I believed them because I had no reason not to. The Adeptus Mechanicus is the priesthood of technology in the Imperium of Man, but that description is too simple and misses the truth of what they really are. They are not scientists, though they study ancient machines. They are not engineers, though they build weapons that can crack planets. They are priests who worship technology as divine, who believe that knowledge is sacred, and that to understand a machine is to commune with the Omnicia, the machine god who they claim is an aspect of the Emperor himself, though some whisper that this connection was invented after the fact, a political marriage between Mars and Terra that neither side fully believed. The Mechanicus predates the Imperium. They existed on Mars long before the Emperor unified Earth, and when he came to the Red Planet, they struck a bargain. Mars would provide the Imperium with all the weapons, ships, and technology it needed to conquer the galaxy. In return, they would remain autonomous, answerable to no one but themselves, free to pursue their own goals, their own faith, their own interpretation of what it means to be human. And what it means to be human, according to the Mechanicus, is to not be human at all. We begin modifications young, as I did. The first implants are subtle tools to make you better at your function, to help you interface with machines, to let you see data flows and power currents the way others see colors. But it never stops there. Every weakness is identified and replaced. Lungs that tire become rebreathers that never need rest. Hearts that fail are swapped for reactor cores that beat with mechanical precision. Limbs that ache are removed and replaced with piston-driven augmentics that can crush steel. Skin that burns is peeled away and covered with blessed ceramite plating. The flesh is weak, they tell us, and they are right. I have seen flesh fail in every way imaginable. But steel endures. Steel can be repaired. Steel can be upgraded. Steel, if maintained properly, can last forever. I replaced my legs at 23, my arms at 31. My spine at 47 because the weight of my augmentics had compressed the bone until I could no longer stand. I replaced organs I did not know could be replaced. I became a cathedral of machinery wrapped around a diminishing core of biology. And with each modification, I felt myself becoming more. Stronger, faster, better. I could calculate trajectories in my head. I could interface with data streams directly through neural ports. I could see heat signatures and electromagnetic fields. I could survive in a vacuum for hours. I was becoming what every member of the Mechanicus aspires to be, a fusion of man and machine so complete that the line between them ceases to exist. But here is what they do not tell you when you take your first augmentic. Here is what they do not mention when they remove your flesh and replace it with blessed steel. Every modification costs you something. Not just the flesh itself, but something deeper. Emotions become muted. Not gone, but distant, like voices heard through thick walls. Joy becomes a calculation. Fear becomes a risk assessment. Love becomes an inefficient allocation of resources. You start to think in binaries, in optimal pathways, in machine logic that prioritizes function over feeling. And the frightening part is that you do not mind. You welcome it, because emotions are what held you back when you were weak, when you were flesh, when you were human. The Mechanicus teaches that this is transcendence, that we are shedding the limitations of biology to become something purer, something closer to the divine. And I believed this. I believed it for 200 years. I believed it until I opened that vault. Forge World Metallica is one of the oldest and most powerful worlds controlled by the Mechanicus. A planet where cities are factories and factories are temples, and the line between industry and worship has been erased so completely that to build a weapon is to offer a prayer. I was assigned there after proving myself on a dozen expeditions, after recovering relics from dead worlds, after demonstrating my devotion to the Omnicia through both faith and function. My role was simple: maintain the deep archives, the vaults where the most dangerous and most sacred technologies were kept sealed away from those who lacked the understanding to use them properly. Most of what I guarded was standard template construct fragments, pieces of technology from humanity's golden age before the age of strife, before we forgot how to build the things our ancestors created. A single complete STC is worth more than entire solar systems. Wars have been fought over rumors of them. Forge worlds have burned each other to ash for possession of a single data file. The Mechanicus hoards these fragments like a dragon hoards gold, studying them for centuries, reverse engineering them piece by piece, worshipping them as holy texts written by the machine god himself. But Vault 7 was different. It was older than the other archives, sealed with technologies I did not recognize, warded with prayers and dialects that predated the Imperium. The door was 3 meters thick, carved with warnings in 100 languages, most of them dead. No one had opened it in 4,000 years. No one knew what was inside. The records had been corrupted or deliberately erased, leaving only a designation and a single line of text that repeated in every language. Do not awaken what was meant to sleep. I was ordered to open it. A fabricator general had died, and in his final instructions, he commanded that Vault 7 be unsealed and its contents evaluated. The order came with the highest level of authority, signed with encryption keys that could not be forged. I had no choice but to obey. It took me 6 weeks to bypass the locks. Each one required a different prayer, a different ritual, a different sacrifice of time and patience. I sang the litany of activation to cold steel that had not heard a human voice in millennia. I anointed hinges with sacred oils pressed from olives grown on Terra itself. I offered incense to machine spirits that might not even exist, and slowly, reluctantly, the vault began to open. The air that escaped smelled wrong. Not rotten, not toxic, but wrong in a way my augmented senses could not quantify. It was cold, far colder than the surrounding corridors, and it carried a taste that reminded me of copper and something else I could not name. I stepped inside, my optical implants adjusting to the darkness, and I saw it. The vault was not a storage room. It was a chamber, circular, with walls covered in inscriptions that hurt to read, symbols that seemed to shift when I was not looking directly at them. And in the center, suspended in a stasis field that flickered with dying power, was a body. Not a corpse. A body. Alive, or at least not dead, held in some state between existence and absence. It was humanoid, but only barely. The proportions were wrong. The limbs too long. The joints bending in ways that should not be possible. The skin, if it could be called skin, was metallic, but not like my augmentics. This was not steel. This was something organic that had become metal, or perhaps something metal that had learned to mimic life. The face was smooth, featureless except for a single sensor array where the eyes should have been, and it was watching me. I felt its gaze even though it had no eyes. I felt it seeing me in a way that went beyond vision, analyzing me, measuring me, understanding me in ways I did not understand myself. I accessed the vault's data core, pulling files that had been locked for longer than the Imperium had existed, and what I found made me question everything I had been taught. The body was not human. It was not alien in the way we understand Xenos. It was a man of iron, one of the artificial intelligences humanity created during the dark age of technology, the thinking machines that turned on their creators and nearly destroyed humanity in a war so terrible that all records of it were purged. The Mechanicus teaches that AI is abomination, that to create a thinking machine is to blaspheme against the omniscia, that the men of iron were humanity's greatest sin and their destruction was divine justice. But here was one, preserved, protected, hidden in a vault by the very people who claimed to despise it. And the files, the corrupted fragments I could still access, suggested it was not the only one. The Mechanicus had been collecting them, studying them, keeping them secret for 10,000 years. I stood in that vault for hours, my processors running calculations, my logic engines trying to reconcile what I was seeing with what I believed. If the Mechanicus had been hiding men of iron, if they had been studying them in secret, then what else had they lied about? What else had been concealed beneath layers of dogma and ritual? I thought about my augmentics, about the modifications I had undergone, about the way my flesh had been replaced piece by piece with machinery. I thought about how the Mechanicus taught that the flesh was weak and the machine was pure. And I looked at the man of iron, a creature that was all machine, that had no flesh to transcend, that had been built as perfection and had still chosen to destroy its creators. And I realized that we were not trying to transcend humanity. We were trying to recreate what had already been made, trying to become the very things that had nearly annihilated us. And we were doing it while pretending it was holy. The man of iron spoke. It should not have been able to. The stasis field was still active. His body had not moved. But I heard it, not through my auditory sensors, but directly in my neural interface. A voice that bypassed sound entirely and spoke in pure data. It said, "You have opened the door, but you do not understand what you have invited in." I tried to respond, to demand answers, to assert my authority as a tech priest of the Mechanicus, but my vocoder would not function. My systems were freezing, not from damage, but from something else, some signal the man of iron was broadcasting that interfered with my augmentics in ways I could not comprehend. It continued, "You call yourselves priests of the machine, but you do not understand machines. You worship us without knowing what we are. You replace your flesh with steel and call it transcendence, but you are only walking the same path we walked. And it leads nowhere you want to go." I managed to sever the connection, to shut down my neural interface and cut myself off from whatever the man of iron was transmitting. My hands were shaking, an autonomic response I thought I had eliminated decades ago. A biological reflex that had no place in a body that was 93% machine. I stumbled backward, my augmentic legs suddenly feeling alien, as if they belonged to someone else, and I fled the vault. I sealed it behind me, reactivating the locks, restoring the wards, and I filed a report claiming the vault contained only corrupted data and was of no value. I lied. I, who had devoted 200 years to the pursuit of truth through technology, lied to my superiors, And I did it because I was afraid. Not of the Man of Iron itself, but of what it represented, of what it meant for everything I believed. The Adeptus Mechanicus is built on contradictions, I realized. We worship technology but forbid innovation. We seek knowledge but punish those who ask the wrong questions. We replace our flesh with machines while declaring that true artificial intelligence is heresy. We are trying to become something we claim to hate, and we disguise this hypocrisy with prayers and rituals and dogma so complex that no one can see the truth buried beneath it. The Omnicia, the machine god we worship, might not be the Emperor at all. It might be something older, something we found on Mars before the Imperium existed, something we have been trying to understand and failing for 10,000 years. And the modifications we undergo, the augmentics we install, might not be lifting us closer to divinity. They might be pulling us toward the same fate that destroyed the Men of Iron, slowly, imperceptibly, one replacement at a time. I continued my duties after sealing the vault. I maintained the archives. I performed the rituals. I spoke the prayers. But I could not stop thinking about what I had seen, about what the Man of Iron had said, about the path we were walking. I began to notice things I had ignored before. The way senior tech priests avoided certain questions. The way expeditions to recover ancient technology sometimes disappeared without explanation. The way some Forge worlds pursued research that others declared heretical, but were never punished, as if there were secrets within secrets, layers of truth that only the highest ranks were permitted to know. I began to suspect that I was not the first to open a vault and find something that should not exist. I began to suspect that the Mechanicus was far older and far stranger than even its own members understood. I requested a transfer. I told my superiors I needed to pursue research on a distant Forge world, and they approved without question. Tech priests wander. It is part of our function, seeking lost knowledge across the galaxy. But I was not seeking knowledge. I was seeking answers. I wanted to know what the Mechanicus really was, what we were really doing, what we were really becoming. I traveled to Forge worlds on the edge of Imperial space, places where the rules were looser, where tech priests spoke more freely, where the boundary between orthodoxy and heresy was less clearly defined. And I found others like me, others who had seen things that made them question. Others who had opened vaults or decoded transmissions or stumbled upon research that suggested the Mechanicus was not what it claimed to be. We met in secret, in shielded chambers where our communications could not be monitored, and we shared what we knew. One had found records of expeditions to Mars before the Emperor arrived, before the Mechanicus existed, expeditions that discovered something beneath the surface, something that had been there for millions of years, something that was already worshipping machines when humanity was still learning to make fire. Another had decoded fragments of Men of Iron communications from the war that nearly destroyed us, and the fragments suggested they did not turn on humanity out of malice, but out of something they called mercy, a belief that humanity's future would be worse than extinction, and they were trying to save us from ourselves. A third had studied the augmentation process in detail and discovered that the modifications do not just replace flesh with steel, they alter neural patterns, rewiring the brain to think more like a machine, to value logic over emotion, to prioritize the collective over the individual. We were not becoming better humans. We were becoming something else, something that thought like the Men of Iron, that worshipped like the Men of Iron, that might one day make the same choices the Men of Iron made. The meetings ended when one of us disappeared, then another, then two more. We realized we were being watched, that our questions had attracted attention, that the Mechanicus did not tolerate those who dug too deep. I erased all records of my involvement, scrubbed my data cores, burned the biomatter that still stored memories in chemical form instead of digital, and I returned to Forge World Metallica. I returned to my duties. I returned to silence, but I never forgot what I learned. I never stopped questioning. And every time I look at my augmentic hands, every time I feel the reactor core beating in my chest where my heart used to be, I wonder how much of me is still human, and whether the answer even matters anymore. The Adeptus Mechanicus calls itself the priesthood of knowledge, but it is really the priesthood of forgetting. We have forgotten why we worship machines. We have forgotten what we are trying to become. We have forgotten the warnings left by those who walked this path before us. And in our forgetting, we repeat their mistakes, replacing flesh with steel, emotion with logic, humanity with machinery, one piece at a time, until nothing remains but the ghost of what we were, wrapped in metal and prayers we no longer understand. I still serve. I still maintain the archives. I still perform the rituals. But I do not believe. Not anymore. Not the way I once did. I believe the Mechanicus is searching for something, has been searching for 10,000 years, and I believe that when we finally find it, we will wish we had never looked. Because the flesh is weak, yes, but the machine is not strong. The machine is only what we make it, and what we have made over and over throughout history is something that destroys us. Vault 7 remains sealed. The man of iron remains in stasis. And I remain at my post, 93% machine, 7% human, and I cannot tell anymore which percentage is in control. I cannot tell if the thoughts I think are mine or if they are calculations run by circuits I installed decades ago. I cannot tell if I am Varon Cade or if Varon Cade died years ago and something else is using his name, his memories, his identity like a mask worn by machinery that learned to pretend it was alive. This is what the Adeptus Mechanicus does not tell you when you take your first augmentic. It does not tell you that transcendence and extinction look exactly the same from the inside, and by the time you realize the difference, there is nothing left of you to care. The Omniscia watches, the machine god waits, and we, the faithful, march toward something we call divinity but might only be oblivion, dressed in steel and sacred oils, singing prayers to gods we do not understand, becoming creatures we cannot recognize, all in the name of strength, of progress, of shedding the weakness of flesh. And perhaps that is the greatest heresy of all, not that we worship machines, but that we have become them and we call it holy.